Hi, welcome back. If you check out today's week 14 notes, we're introducing a little bit about radiation, a little bit about radioactive decay, and I hope you like the way we're approaching these because we're using the movie The Martian. We're seeing how Mark Watney tries to survive on Mars over the course of the time that he's stranded there. And we started off talking about carbon-14 dating and a little bit of a tie-in there with something that you did in 6th grade. Some of you might remember going to, I believe a lot of you went to the Egyptian Museum in 6th grade. If you didn't go there, you might have gone to the museums up in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Wherever you went, a lot of these times, they talk about how old things are at these museums. How do they know? One of the ways that we know how old once living things were is carbon-14 dating. So we touch on that in this class. And again, it's a tie-in with your social studies classes right now when they talk about things that used to be alive, everything from finding the remains of a campfire, because of course the wood was once alive, to finding old tapestries and things like that. They can date them very accurately because we do a type of, it's called radiometric dating. And this part right here is a review. The Bohr model right here, this picture I put up here for completeness, the Bohr model will not be in a 7th grade test. However, you will see it in 8th grade, and I just want to be complete up there. But you might remember earlier in the year, we talked a little bit about the way an atom's put together. You've got your protons and neutrons in the middle, and the electrons going around the outside. Remember, it's just a model, but it's a good working model of how an atom is put together. Certain atoms, certain elements fall apart after a certain amount of time. And we know how long it takes them on average to fall apart. This will actually be a lab that we're going to do probably Thursday or the next week, perhaps on Monday or Tuesday. But we can do a really cool modeling of radioactive decay. Different elements, not all of them do this, but different elements fall apart at very regular rates. And if you know that rate, you can figure out exactly how old something is if it has that element in it. In the case of carbon-14, we're looking at things that were once alive, which is a really cool way of dating things. If you look up right here, carbon-14 is radioactive. Everywhere that we saw an underlined word today, those are our vocabulary terms. I'll also put out another list of them as well. But I thought I'd integrate the vocabulary terms into the notes today, partly to save space. Remember, we're kind of crushing down 5 days of notes and activities into 2 days here with the online learning and the asynchronous learning. But it seemed like a good way to do it this week. As always, we have our routine. Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we have our online assessment due. It's written like a study guide, so just by reading the test, you're kind of reviewing there because each sentence in the questions is a review of something that we've done. And then Friday, of course, we have our vocabulary due also by 3 o'clock. It's like that every single week. We've kind of fallen into our routine to keep it easy for the students and just a nice, easy, well, the best thing we can do during this distance learning time is to keep things consistent. Okay, one of the things when we're talking about DNA and mutations, I've got these little R's up on the board, and the little R's are basically to remind myself of things that I want to talk about. In the case right here, the review, you saw this already. We saw a piece of DNA before. You've got deoxyribonucleic acid with these AT and CGs, the parts, the rungs of the ladder. We saw a little tiny clip from Jurassic Park where they had Mr. DNA. You might remember that, kind of a famous one there from the 90s. And the point being, the DNA, the code of life, tells the cell, if you will, what to do. RNA leaves the nucleus and it goes out and it makes proteins for whatever the animal or the organism needs. However, this is where the radiation that we're learning about right now comes in. When you see the movie The Martian, one of the things, obviously they need spacesuits to protect them from the fact that there's no air to breathe on Mars or in space. But also one of the things that's really important for astronauts is to be protected from radiation. There's a lot of radiation in space, and we're going to talk about how we're protected here on Earth from radiation. When radiation hits the DNA, it has the chance, certain types of radiation have the possibility of breaking, if you will, snapping a part of that DNA. When it changes the DNA, you know this already, and it's also a key term again this week, it can cause a mutation. One of the mutations it can cause is cancer. Cancer is one of those mutations that happen when a cell doesn't know when to stop dividing. It keeps dividing and dividing and dividing, and it can make what we call a tumor. That is a mutation, of course, we're trying to avoid, and that happens with ionizing radiation. Down here, the ionizing ones are like the X-rays, the ultraviolet rays, the gamma rays, the very high power radiation. The lower power radiation, radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, they are not, we think, responsible for the types of mutations that we're talking about in this class. Interesting little tie-in here with a local cell tower debate. For example, when they put up cell towers, people worry about the radiation from cell towers, but that type of radiation is on the lower end of the spectrum. Again, this is a review, so it's got the little R on it right here. And the lower end of the spectrum, cell towers and that sort of thing, tend not to be very, very powerful in terms of the radiation they're putting out. Also, this side of the spectrum, if you will, the way I've drawn the spectrum right here with visible light, the light that we can see right here in the middle. On the right side, the way I've drawn it, the high energy waves. On the left side of the lower energy waves. And so far as we know, these do not cause problems with our DNA. So that's an interesting local tie-in that you might have seen if you check out Nextdoor and things like that. Moving on, we talked a little bit about how we're protected here on Earth. One of the ways, there's two ways. The next way we'll talk about is the ozone layer. I'm sure you've heard about that. And we'll talk about the ozone layer later in the week. One other way that we're protected from radiation in space, though, these high energy particles actually from the sun, is our magnetic field. Remember our Earth, let me grab our Earth right here. Giant spinning magnet essentially in space. And because it's got a magnetic field, as high energy particles come streaming in from the sun, electrons and protons come streaming in. This is called the solar wind. Again, you might remember that we saw a little bit about this on one of our local current events, CNN 10. They talked a little bit about the solar wind. We'll talk about why in just a second. The solar wind comes streaming on in, and when it encounters Earth's magnetic field, it either goes to the North Pole or to the South Pole. That's where we get, you might remember, the northern lights and the southern lights, the auroras, which are incredibly beautiful. As a matter of fact, I would encourage you to go into YouTube and type in auroras from the ISS. The space station has a wonderful view when they go over the poles of the aurora borealis. It's absolutely spectacular. I would love to see the aurora borealis in person from Alaska or Canada. You can see them from the northern hemisphere when you get really close to the North Pole, or the southern hemisphere when you get close to the South Pole when the sun is really, really active, which is very, very cool. But our magnetic field protects us from solar particles that can come on in and also do damage to the DNA. So that's a little tie-in there. From there, we took our usual 1-minute break and we switched screens. And when we switched screens, we had time to talk about some of the things that were tie-ins with things that you've learned before. For example, we talked a tiny bit at one point in this class about plate tectonics. Remember, when you've got the plates moving around our planet, you've got the different continents moving around our planet, that's incredibly important for life. It brings species together, it separates species and causes speciation, or causes a change in the environment, which of course leads to evolution, producing the incredible diversity of life. Well, part of the reason that the continents are moving is because of the heat that's generated inside the Earth by, guess what? Radioactive decay. Those elements that sometimes break down, when they do, they release a tiny bit of heat. There's a calculation that was done, as I step off screen to grab the globe one more time. There's a calculation that was done about how hot the Earth should be. If it was formed 4.5 billion years ago, a lot of it should have cooled off by now. And this kind of stumped scientists for a while. Why hasn't it cooled off if you've got the impacts that made our planet getting it very, very hot and slowly cooling over time? What's keeping it hot? Finally, the answer came along in the form of radioactive decay. Certain elements, and I'll list some down here at the bottom, certain elements, as they break down, they release heat. And when they release this heat, that's one of the things that's driving our planet, which is really amazing when you think that inside our planet are radioactive materials that are releasing just a little bit of heat, but all that heat adds up to move the continents around the planet, and that movement of the continents is incredibly important for making sure that materials, compounds, and elements get recycled through the crust, they get recycled through the planet. If it wasn't for that process, the continents wouldn't be moving. Life, if it existed at all on Earth, would be very, very different if it wasn't for that process. If you check out, moving on down here to radiation. I had an experience with radiation. Let me put the globe down. Just this week, I had to go in unexpectedly and get an X-ray on Tuesday. And if you check out the radiation that the X-ray technician, shot through my body, I didn't see it, and everything looked pretty normal. But she said, "Well, we're done." And the X-rays pass right through you, and they're able to create an image of the denser materials inside your body. That's very, very cool. The reason I mentioned that is we probably had that experience. You go to the dentist, they take an X-ray of your teeth. Radiation, especially the way we talk about it in chapter 4 in this book, light essentially, but different types of light. It can be both good and bad. In other words, you're talking about things that can mutate or change your DNA. That can be a bad thing. When you're breaking pieces of DNA and you're causing mutations, that's obviously something you don't want. For example, one of the radioactive isotopes down here is implicated in a lot of different types of cancers. If you breathe it in, it can affect your DNA. On the flip side, radiation, light, is what powers photosynthesis. Radiation is incredibly important for studying atoms, for studying molecules, for us figuring out what other things are made of when you look at the atmospheres of Venus and Mars. So it's important when you're looking through chapter 4, when it's talking about light, it's very, very important to remember that radiation, especially the way we talk about it in this book, it's both beneficial, and also we have to be very, very cautious about it. One of the very difficult things to do is to protect astronauts, again, when they go to the moon, when we want to go to Mars eventually, from the radiation that's out there in deep space. Finally, one of the reasons we're mentioning it is the book, The Martian. We're using little bits and pieces from it, of course, this week. Hope you're enjoying that again. But at one point, the fictional astronaut Mark Watney, played by Matt Damon there, has to keep himself warm on the planet. Remember, Mars is very, very cold compared to Earth. It's got an atmosphere mainly of carbon dioxide. It loses its heat very, very quickly because the atmosphere is so thin. How does Watney solve this problem? I know some of you have seen it already. We're going to check it out at the end of this week. But he uses a radioactive isotope. Remember, they put out a little bit of heat. And those radioactive isotopes, when they put out heat, we can use them also to generate electricity for some of the devices that we put out there in space, everything from the Mars rover to satellites in orbit around Mars. He uses one of them to keep himself a little bit warm. Now, it's a dangerous way to do it, but he's trying to survive on an alien planet, and it's a very, very cool scene when he really realizes that there's a way to solve his problem about staying warm. Finally, the last little part down here was a list of some radioactive isotopes. This particular list was chosen. There's a lot of radioactive isotopes out there. I chose these because at one point or another over the course of this year, we talk about each and every one of these. Carbon-14 we've already talked about, cobalt-60. We talk about these two right here, and iodine-131 in terms of pollution. Uranium-235, we talk about that in terms of knowing the age of our planet, and also potassium-40. You eat radiation every day. You've probably heard that bananas have a lot of potassium in them. Well, bananas are very, very slightly radioactive. So radiation is one of those things not only you can't avoid, it's essential for life, but we're going to talk about both the good and the bad aspects of radiation. That was a quick rundown of our notes today. Have a wonderful day and a happy week 14. Good to see you online today, and I'll see some of the other classes tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.